The funding plan is a critical piece of the financial analysis worksheets because it identifies the funding sources, any savings or revenues that may be achieved through the implementation. So you're going to be able to see from the funding plan how you are going to fund it and actually what kind of monies you need to fund your project. So this, even though we've been focused on the IT portion where, you know, your approval letter is going to show your IT staff plus the OE&E, the funding plan actually is looking at the funding for the entire project, which includes the program staff. So when we're looking at this is an automatic, the funding plan for the most part until you get to the funding sources. And also if you had some special funding that you had, is automatically populated. So this total project cost automatically is entered by the sheets, the future, the total, also the redirected total, and then also what you are going to need from a project and a future ops funding perspective. And then it provides the option to fund it through general, special, federal funds, other funds where you could specify which funds, or if it's a cost recovery or reimbursement funds. And then also if you have local assistance, same categories. However, one critical piece of this is that whatever you put in your funding source, they do need to add up to 100%. So yeah, you could have 75% general fund and 25% special funds, but that would ultimately equal 100%. So that would be something that if I was doing this, I would definitely make sure that all my funding equals that 100%. So I kind of want to bring up that the sheet before we go on to the exercise. So I have the answers again, and here's the funding plan. And when we look at this funding plan, as we were talking about, all of these figures are automatically entered. The fiscal years for the planning, fiscal years for the project. The only things that would need to be entered are on future annual costs. Is if it's not if it is not in the prior project cost year, you're always going to have at least one future annual cost that you're going to have to manually select from the drop down, and it'll pre-populate once you do that. If I were to select something that is outside what's in the sheets, it's going to give me this NA. So if you ever see that, that means that that fiscal year is not used and it's not applicable. So if I went back here and I changed it back, it brings in that right amount. We'll notice one thing that I'd like you to notice is that 2021-22 fiscal year, it has an overlapping with project and future ops, because remember we had 10 months of project and 2 months of future ops. So together they equal that one full year, so that when you're getting ready to do your BCP, it's going to align in one fiscal year. So my 2021, I would need this portion for project and this portion for continuing or ongoing, but they would both fall under 2021-22 fiscal year. As you'll notice, I could make this 50%. Now, if I delete this, it's going to show 50%, which I know I need to show so that it equals 100%. So if I did 50 again, it would show that 50. If, for instance, I have some funding that is existing or that is operating OE&E, and I know I'm not going to need a BCP for it, there is an area right here between 14 and 16, rows 14 and rows 16, where I can show that I'm using existing funds for that portion. So this, my total project is, I'm going to make it just a little bigger. So my total project is costs are for that fiscal year are $346,290. There's no future costs, so the total's there. Of that total, this much, 146,008 is redirected. So if we went back to our sheets for 1920 project, so I'm going to go to the project, 146.36 for 1920. If I went back to 1920 and I went down to my existing staff, it equals 146.16, which is what is excluded from the amount I need, because I don't need to be funded again for existing staff. So that the sheet automatically removes those costs from the total. And then it says, okay, my total that I need is not, what is that? 946,290 minus the 146, which equals 800,274 for my first year of project. My second year, I need 473. My third year, I need 434,697, which is the combined total of future and one-time project costs, which equal that. So my BCP should match exactly what these are. If they don't, there would need to be that conversation with the Department of Technology and from ITCU to find out why it doesn't match what I'm asking for from a BCP standpoint. Also, in ongoing costs, it's showing that on an ongoing basis, I need that 237,995. So this one brings in what my total is for that. And guess what? This total is actually the total for project staff and all staff. So it's not only the IT, but it's also the program, because I need to show that I need funding not only for my IT, but my total project costs. So if I went back to that 2022, 23, 421, 435, it will be 431, 435, which that includes all my staff. It doesn't exclude so that the program staff are not included. It includes the program staff. So if you were writing the BCP, you'd have to consider that this portion for your future ops, you may have to manually calculate that the department might show what they fund for IT and also what they fund for program, but they should equal out to this amount, that 237,995. Even though it's going to include program and IT in the funding, because the project needs to be funded totally. However, the way that they write the BCP is probably this portion over here. This portion is what would be included in the BCP for the IT area, and only that one position. The other two or three, the other position, I guess, the other two positions would be probably on a program BCP or the program section. Does that make sense? Clear as anything? And so one thing on the alt fund, on the funding plan, couple things I want to bring up. It automatically is tied to the alternative one project. So any information here is going to come from alt one project or alt one future ops. It also would have the ability to, if there had been more years listed under the project. So if I went over here and I unhid this and I put in the next year, and then just put in some positions. My funding plan would automatically bring in that information and show it. And then I would hide the ones that are blank. But we know that we don't need that. So if I delete it and delete this, and then go ahead and rehide all the blanks, except for the totals, it's going to show that I only need that many and I could hide the rest of these. But it will automatically bring those totals in so that once you have what your alternative costs are, you'll be able to know how many on your funding plan you would need to show. One thing, another important thing is that if you have existing funds, you can indicate them here. So if I said, I have 800,274 that I'm going to fund it, it'll show that my BCP, which is line 24, I don't need funding for that year. However, when I put that, I would need to indicate why I don't need funding, because that could, there could be a lot of reasons, and you would, a department would need to explain why they don't need the funding. The sheets will automatically exclude that, but there still would be an explanation as to why. So with that, I think the next one won't take very long, so we'll just give about 15 minutes, and I'm going to bring the PowerPoint back up. Come on.
So Nancy, this is just a general question. If existing funds are redirected from somewhere within the department, would that require approval from Department of Finance, or would it require some kind of BCP to lower, the funding for whatever that other source is?
That's a very good question. And anytime that you are dealing with that funding portion, I would recommend that you are working with your budget staff and also with ITCU, because they're the ones that are going to need to know what kind of funding you're using, because especially when it relates to a BCP, and their question could be, why do you have this $800,000 available when that was for X? Why are you using for this? It could raise some questions as to why aren't you using it for the intended purpose, right?
Okay, yeah.
So it's not that, yeah, you can definitely do it. It's just, it probably will raise questions as to why.
So Nancy,
Yeah.
My understanding from working with ITCU is that all project dollars are available to be moved from one area to another, and it does have to be explained. And eventually they might have to do an SPR to show all those variances or how they addressed variances. But we've even pulled money from the M&O section of from the total project costs.
And I will say that, those are conversations I think best with the PAO manager and also with ICU, because when you are moving funds around, it could raise red flags, and there could be a reason. And most likely, as long as all of those parties are on board and you're explaining why and how and what dollars are being moved, it probably is legitimate and would be approved. But I'm not sure. That's a question for ITCU and PAO manager.
Hey, Nancy, this is Rob.
Yeah.
I would say that's pretty much a case-by-case basis because every department's a little bit different and every project's a little bit different. So that's exactly why we want we want the departments to put comments in there. So that way we can get back to our budgets and verify if that is an allowable to use funds from a different area or whatnot. So there's no one way to look at that, but just put the comments in there and we'll address it with our budgets group as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Rob. All right, so taking your FAW's training exercise, let's just take about 10 minutes and go ahead and complete it from the information that you've already entered on your blank. You should have the ability to identify funding sources and go ahead and follow the instructions here. And then we will get back together at 1 o'clock. 12 o'clock. Might go over just about 15 minutes. So going to our responses, row 24 is the total additional funding needed, whether it's whatever the costs were for that fiscal year, it's going to show up there. So we know that for the 2018-19, our BCP should match the 114,690. The 2018-19, it would match the 800,274. The BCP should match that 473,774, and then 434,697. We have a partial year for project and a partial year for future ops, so we know that those are going to show up both together under that same fiscal year. So the first year after that is 2023-24. If I wanted to go ahead and add that next year, 23-24, it's going to give me that NA, which means, okay, that's not applicable. That year, we have no information in that year. So if I went back over here, I don't have anything beyond 22-23. So I know, okay, I need to delete that. There shouldn't be anything there. But there should be something in that final M&O year, which is that 22-23. So it shows that I need 237,995 funded, because even though I need 435, there is existing funding from those staff that have been redirected that are subtracted from that total, which gives you what you need from on an additional funding basis. So the BCP would match this 237,995. Now, of course, that would be partly staff and partly OME. So that detail would be back in the worksheet where you could look at this, of that the total 207,995 would be what should be on the BCP, and then also the 30,000 would be the other amount for OE&E on an ongoing basis. And again, had there been additional years, we would just open or closed based on those. And if we had existing funds that we were using, we would put them in the 14 through 16. And we would explain them in comments, where that money is coming from and what is being used. So let's go ahead and just for the next example, let's go ahead and just put in there 400,000 of operating. Let's just put existing funds, 400,000. So really what I would need on my BCP is 34,697. So if I was using these tools, this Alt1 planning BCP or this Alt1 project, they're going to match what we need. So the total additional funding would be the 114,690. So if I went over here and I went to my planning BCP, it would show that 114,690 is what I need. So if I was a department looking at this, I would know that these are the categories, the breakdown of what I need. So very helpful when I'm writing my BCP or when I'm reviewing what a department has put in as a BCP. If I went to this, I could see how it was broken down based on where they put the where a department placed the information. It would show they're indicating that they have a professional inter-services department category, and then they also have external professional services, so that I could know, oh, that's how they're breaking it down. And then it automatically brings in the information, so there's no entry needed other than to hide the rows. Of course, this is going to have that, if I unhid it using that between H and R, and I did the unhide, it's going to show all the years possible, which is that 5 years. But because we know there's only one planning year, we can just rehide that. So that's for planning purposes. I could look at this sheet and know that a department's BCP should match these totals, and these are the categories that most likely they would be under. So it would, all of these would be under OE&E, and they would be for professional services. So however the department categorizes them, then that's how you would be able to compare and say they need 39,690 and also 75,000. Likewise, on the project side, which also includes the future ops, it's going to bring in where all those dollars are and if they're project or if they're future ops. So this one is combined for the project costs, and it brings in all the funds, and then it also brings in if there's a future op total that's just future ops. So if we went back over here and we look at this one, sorry, this one right here, this is the future ops only. So anytime there's the final M&O year, it's going to come in right here, and it's going to show that they need 207,995 for future operations on an ongoing basis. So if we went back to our funding plan, we know that we had excluded 400,000 from 21-22. So right here, if I'm a department, if I go to that same year, 21-22, I'm going to have to, this would be a perfect opportunity for me to show where I am not going to fund it through a BCP. I'm using existing funds, and I could put that in my comments. So if I said I have 400,000, I would just be letting letting them know that this is where that funding came from. up and what was excluded and what was used for existing funds. So hopefully that made sense.
A question, Nancy, when you
Yeah.
put 400,000 earlier in the funding tab,
Yes,
does that copy to the BCP, the planning, the project or plan BCP?
no, it doesn't. So that's why you do have to manually go in and tell the sheet of that money. So you could go here and say, well, I'm funding the 154,285. I get that right? 154, which is over in this column N, right, for this particular year, 285. And it would show I don't need any funds, right? If I go here and I put in that 30 or 46,285, that's saying for that fiscal year, I do not need any future or project dollars for 21, 22. I'm using existing funds. The key to this is that when you enter this information, that whatever it is that you put on your funding plan, that you match that 400,000. So if I went back over here to my BCP, I'm at 229,590. So it looks like I still need to show where that additional money is coming. Or that's probably that 400,000. Because it's 205 here, and then it's 29,000 here. So it's still showing that I need 205. So I would need to go here and whatever that difference was between the 500,000. So let's just say it's 150. And we get down to the bottom line that we need 55,127. So we went to our funding plan. It shows we need 34. So, I mean, you could, whatever it is, you would just make sure that that amount matches what you put as what the existing funds you're using. And I mean, I could go through there and make sure that it matches, but I think you get the idea. Does that make sense to everybody? I will say that the Alt-1 planning and Alt-1 project BCP tabs are optional. Departments do not need to use them, but it is a tool that is helpful when you are finding, which categories, and also when you're reviewing a BCP, this is a good document to look at, because normally, they're probably using BCP money. They wouldn't have anything in there, and in their funding plan, they're going to write it out. And this, most likely, that BCP that they do is going to match the categories here, which is helpful when you're trying to decide, does the BCP match totally? So you can look here and say, well, it indicates that they need 198,822 for positions. So you could look at that, it matches there. And then it also shows that they need 274,952 for OE&E. So once you go and you look at those categories, you would be able to say that, yeah, that matches what their project costs are. Of course, you could go right to the sheet and it would match too, but this provides us more of a summary listing of all the costs that they've indicated in their project or future ops tabs. And partly, one thing that you would have to do is just make sure that if they do use existing funds, that if they are using this, that they're telling you where they're excluding it from the BCP, and that'll be helpful from a, from a review purpose also, because if they say they need 127,450 for staff, and then plus benefits, and the BCP doesn't match this, and they have used existing funds, hopefully they are going in here. This would be a good tool, say they're using 50,000 of existing funds, and that would help you to see, oh, they're only going to request 34,885. So if that was the case, and they did this, they were using 50,000 of existing funds for 21, 22. So on here, they could go here and put in that 50,000. And the total that they need is that 384. So if we went back here and we went to the, it's going to show that they need 384,697. So it'll automatically it translates what they have entered, but if they're excluding amounts, this is where they would put it on the other funding use, existing funds used. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay, great. So moving on to our next section real quickly. If I can get my mouse to work again. We went over how this is in here for your reference, that if you went to Alt 1 project row 356, these are the totals. On the funding plan, those same totals are on this sheet. If you look, that's 273, 494, that's 273, 494. It automatically brought it in from that location on the Alt 1 project. The next one, 946, 290. This is 946, 290. The next one, 619, 790, 619, 790. The next one is a combined total. So it's the 516, 492 plus the future ops, which was 71,967 for that fiscal year. So that kind of to give you an idea where those totals come from, so that if you're reviewing it, you'll be able to say, okay, I know where that comes from. I can go back and look if I need to. And then also for redirected staff, the same thing, where it comes from that Alt 1 project or Alt future ops, rows 125, rows 126 and 125. If you did a comparison, they would match. So this is here so that you could see that if you ever had a question, where does that number come from? You could look back here and find that. So we did those tools where it automatically populates, and they would match that row 24 of the funding plan. So as we talked about, if the entry is for other existing funds, it's going to be a 1-for-1. It's going to match the funding for the bottom line is it's going to match the funding sheet with the BCP sheet. If the department chooses to use this tool.
Quick question, Nancy.
Yeah.
There has been some instances where departments submit their FAW and there are broken links. My question is that if they don't have the password to unlock the spreadsheet, how would it break? How would the links break?
You know, I think there are times when a a department is able to somehow delete a row or delete a cell, that is when the links will break. Otherwise, they will not break if nothing's deleted and nothing is removed. As long as a row is not removed, or a column is not removed, or a cell is removed, the link, that's when the links will break. So that's why we stressed early in the training, whatever you do, don't delete rows, don't delete columns, hide them if you don't need them, but don't delete them. And also, I think sometimes when they copy and paste, that also, it'll pull in a formula or it'll override a formula that's there. And hopefully that does not, I've never seen it happen when it's protected. It's when they have unprotected the sheet for some reason.
Can I ask a quick question, Nancy? Is there a way for us to tell if the spreadsheet has been altered?
Unfortunately, unless you can see, if you are familiar with the spreadsheet and you go into a cell that normally would have a formula and it has no formula, I have seen that where they force a manual number into a calculated cell. Somehow they have determined that that's how they're going to do it. And the only way is to look at the cell itself to find out if they did change the formula. Yeah, so if a department says I need more rows, they need to contact Department of Technology and find out how, if they have the capability and means to add those rows for them. There may be another solution. Maybe it's because they have so many staff, and maybe it's a determination that they can come up with PAO and ITCU and say, well, let's go ahead and use this additional sheet that we can add to the FAWs and just refer to that. I know that has happened in the past. However, those are conversations that you'd have to have with the PAO and ITCU.